I'm black, you're white.
Now what? So what if I say the wrong thing?
You probably will. Who doesn't? But I'll do my best to listen.
Maybe if we're humble enough to listen to each other,
Maybe if we're brave enough to lean into those difficult conversations.
we might
We could
come up with some answers,
make some real progress
discover how much we have in common.
and appreciate our differences.
Now you're talking.
Good evening. I'm David Conley, communications consultant.
And I'm Chris Thurber, clinical psychologist.
And welcome to another edition of I'm Black, You're White.
Now we go.
Here we go. Season
Bring
2 in full swing. Yeah.
Yep.
So we're doing good. How are things with you?
Good. You know, it's been an interesting start to the school year, but glad that so many people are vaccinated and glad that we have some opportunities to be more in community. That feels really good.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm sure. I'm happy about that too. I mean, I'm not having to deal with kids like in high school anymore. I only got one still in college, but he is very happy to be up and amongst,
sure. Yeah.
people at the school. So I'm really happy about that. But just about, being able to kind of be out and, and get out of the stir craziness of just being stuck inside the four walls. And so
no, like if someone's listening to a recording of this, podcast or vlog in 5 years saying, what are they talking about? What,
right.
I don't even remember, the pandemic or something. I think that for me, the enduring experience is going to be of loneliness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
I hear you. That's true. In ways that you never kind of thought you would. It's very interesting how how impacted we have all been by the pandemic, and then how it is yet another thing that sort of continues to polarize us. Just just the response to it is very interesting. So today I kind of wanted to, I guess, kind of wrap with you about some things that are going on, and I guess how we deal with tragedies. Things that would befall us, that would be sort of terrible things, and how I guess race can play a part in how those tragedies are perceived um, or processed. One thing I've been reading a lot about is really sad is the apparent murder of the young lady, Miss Petito. Is the name, I believe.
Yes.
It was a really sad story for such a young life, to be taken like that. Any life to be taken is sad, but I'm just, it's just a sad story. And Godspeed to law enforcement who's trying to find her killer, particularly the person who was the person of interest and on the run, apparently. So it's just a quagmire by itself, and you hope that justice is swift. But it has brought up some very real and very serious conversations, or I should say, brought them back to the forefront, because I've had these discussions before in depth about how serious, if there's going to be a serious nationwide outpouring of media coverage for someone being missing, because at the time a lot of this came up, she was missing, or to find the killer or what have you, that seems to be when that person is white female, whereas the perception is when it's a person of color and they're missing, there's less of a sense of urgency with getting the word out, with finding them, and that kind of thing. So I thought it would be sort of an interesting thing to talk about, just how we view human life, and how race seems to play a part, sadly, in that as well. Um, and I say seems because maybe, your perspective is different, and maybe um, some facts would, bear me out different, but I don't see a lot of women of color getting the same coverage that this young. And let me first be very clear and say, I do not begrudge the media coverage that Ms. Petito is getting, and I know this must be horrible for her family, loved ones, and all of that. So this is not to say that nobody should have looked for her, or should look for to bring her killer to justice, or any of that. I'm not saying any of that. You
Right.
absolutely
Right.
should do that.
Yes.
All I'm saying is that, and all I think people who have this discussion are saying is that uh, the same energy. I'd like to have that same energy when it's a person of color, and
Yeah.
so. Mhm.
I mean, I think one of the things that you and I have returned to thematically in I'm Black, You're White, Now What, is the distinction between a kind of overt racism where someone with malicious intent, like a white person, calls a black person the N-word.
Mhm.
And that sadly still happens. It can't be anymore what people think only about when somebody says there's racism here, there's racism there, or
Mhm.
asks themselves, am I racist? You cannot simply say, for example, well, I don't call my black friends the N-word, ergo, I am not racist.
Mhm.
Because it ignores that simplified definition, or saying, even more, I guess, short-sighted, well, slavery ended with the Civil War.
Right.
What's the big deal? So
Right.
we've come back to this notion that this insidious kind of racism that we want people to work on, or that you and I have been really talking a lot about, has some subtlety to it, but
Mhm.
it's not invisible. For
Mhm.
example, what kind of balance is there in the number of white women who go missing in this country every year and the number of black women who go missing every year in this country? Did I say every country in this year? Okay. The number of white and black women, or men, or children for that matter,
Right.
who go missing, uh, is it is the news coverage equivalent, right? I
Mhm.
mean, if there were 100 more white women who went missing than there were black women, then I suppose equivalent coverage would be something like 100 times more headlines related to these white women than the black women. I don't think that's the case. And whatever the color of the person's skin, if they happen to be a celebrity or if they happen to be attractive, those are other reasons why it makes the headlines. And what
Right.
bothers me is that news outlets, of course, but it doesn't necessarily have to be this way, have a profit motive. They
Mhm.
need to sell newspapers, or they need to sell advertising on their app. And I don't know how I feel exactly. I know I have mixed feelings about having different news apps on my phone, knowing that when I click on there, someone has decided for me that
Mhm.
one story is more newsworthy than another story. So that's what I end up seeing. And they haven't decided arbitrarily. They've decided based on, test cases and, you know, comparing A to B and which gets more clicks and how long people spend on the app. And that's what worries me, is if we can sell more advertising on this particular app by featuring a missing white woman and the tragic and also intriguing mystery behind her death, then, and relatively less time if the person was Black, Indigenous, or person of color. Should I even have that app on my phone? Should I be letting an organization decide for me, and in some kind of implicit way be telling me it's more important that this person went missing than that person?
And I'm saying, I number one, I agree with that, because I don't want that either. I just want the news as best as possible. But the other thing is the assumption that, because I've heard arguments like that before too, but the assumption in that argument is that that bias is playing no role um, in you deciding what is going to generate more income for the. In other words, you're saying that um, that people will care less that indigenous people, women, are being abducted and trafficked and missing in the whole, Montana area. They care less about that than they would one white woman. That even the indigenous people would care less about that than the one. You know what I mean? I think that, but and that's what's being said, and more so that's what's being fed, to the audience. And I think that it's a vicious cycle with that, and I think that that's sad. It's not entirely true that people will care less about missing Black person than they will. But I think you get to further perpetuate that, especially if you want to be able to say these people matter less,
Right. Right.
Meanwhile, the suffering is universal.
Yeah.
What each parent of those women would go through would arguably be the same magnitude and whatever, depending on their relationship with the child and how that's played out, and all of that. But I'm saying just generically, a mother or father's love for their child would have the same intensity if if my child goes missing. I will be as crushed and as driven to find them and or whoever took them as I imagine you would be, Um, so I would not want somebody telling me, even if it's based on some data that suggests you can sell more laundry soap if you put your child on the news than mine.
Right.
That would be, like, horribly insulting. And but also it's one of those things that people like to say about race, that says, well, in a backdoor way and sometimes in an in your face way, that this is a justification for how this treatment is. This is a justification for why we can treat people of color as deficient, because, well, I mean, there really isn't a lot of care about them that much anyway, so they must matter less.
Right. I mean, anything that would imply or give the impression, without explicitly stating, that people from one group have a different status as human beings than people from another group. And I'm adopting some of the language that I've learned from you, and this conceptualization of equal status. When the implication is of unequal status, and that message is coming from an authoritative
Mm-hmm.
source like
Mm-hmm.
a news agency. There's lots and lots of data we have now suggesting that if the whatever you're peddling, true, false, or somewhere in the middle, if you do it under
Mm-hmm.
the banner of being a news agency,
Mm-hmm.
people will in large part believe it. And
Yeah, eat it up.
you know, if one of the things they're believing is people from this group, their lives are not worth as much as people from that group, um, that's a kind of insidious racism that
Mm-hmm.
we need to do everything we can to fight against. And it's what we want to raise people's consciousness about, um, in addition, obviously, to the obvious kinds of racism, but we don't want them to stop and become complacent that, okay, well, look, as I said earlier, I don't use the N word, so I don't need to look any further into this issue.
Right.
I was looking at, David, an article um, that was about the social justice headlines
Mm-hmm.
from the, I want to say, like winter spring of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And this article characterized it as like a new civil rights movement in a sense, because there was, so much energy, so much dialogue, protests, tragic cases, some of which we've talked about on the podcast. And one
Mm-hmm.
of the things that sort of flashed on the screen was the narrator was saying, we have still a lot of work to do. Some things have changed, but relevant to our discussion right now, and we're not necessarily pointing the finger at the corporations or the consumers of the products that the corporations are making. As you said, it's a cycle and there's a shared responsibility. But
Mm-hmm.
um, they showcased some of the products like Uncle Ben's rice, Aunt Jemima maple syrup or maple
Mm-hmm.
flavored syrup. I had to say that. I'm from New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
There is a difference between maple syrup and maple flavored syrup, with all
Right.
due respect. Um, but I can't remember. There might have been a third product, but that feature, a black
Mm-hmm.
person or a caricature almost of a black person. And, I will tell you that I never thought anything more than let's make rice when
Mm-hmm.
I would pull out the box of Uncle Ben's rice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that we ever had Aunt Jemima syrup, but I certainly had it at friends' houses or at summer camp. And my point is, you know, I'm I'm saying by not thinking about it, I'm as guilty as anyone of consuming something that has a message associated with it,
Mm-hmm.
which is not necessarily negative. I mean, if it were David's filmmaking studio or David's special, uh, 8 millimeter retro, movie camera, and you want to put your face on it, like that's awesome for you. Um, but I guess I don't remember the ads for those things, but it certainly did not sit well with consumers. And this is, again, an example of what we're talking about, that this was the branding. I don't know. I just want to know what you think about that, because I feel like it's complicated. I don't know the origin of these brands, and therefore I'm speaking only as a consumer, not as a, product researcher, but
I
I
think that's
wonder
part
what
of
the
the thing,
effect was
though,
on me.
because they have evolved uh, over time. But the it's not just the fact that you have black people on them.
Mm-hmm.
It's uh, the black people were slave representations before,
Okay.
and so now they have in I say recent years, I guess maybe the last 20, 30. Now they're off the boxes altogether
Yeah.
in those two instances. But they have been given makeovers to make them less slave like because people had been upset about them before. But
Mm.
um, if you can just kind of Google them, like the history of some of those things and some of the advertisements with uh, like very dark, very offensive figures that was used to sell all sorts of goods like that. Back this is a um, like an evolution from that.
Okay.
So that's more the problem than just having. Um, I think if you had Dave's 8 millimeter retro cameras on, and Dave was a free entrepreneurial black man who came up with this thing and put it on. I think that's different, and I don't think people would see it as the same. I think if you dressed David up in some slave clothes, made him look like he was running, and the 8 millimeter logo you had made it look like he was running to freedom
Right.
or
Right.
something,
Right.
that people would take issue with that, or you know what I mean. Anything that spoke of some minstrel thing or something like that,
Right.
it would be different. So I think it's that context that we want to people want to forget, but still sort of subtly hold on to, and the
Yeah.
subtlety is more the problem, and more the thing that I think I'm speaking to, even with regard to uh, how we say this life matters more than this other. It's what that subtly says to people, and they're like you with the consuming of the Uncle Ben's
Mm-hmm.
the maple flavored syrup,
Mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
that
Thank you.
they they
This
are
is why we're such good
uh,
friends. You are such a
right,
good
exactly,
listener.
know how to read the room. um but you
Heads
you
up, white guy
you
from New Hampshire, like,
right, he's very sensitive about
oh
the
my
maple
goodness.
flavor. So but I learned something new. I didn't know that, but me, it was just syrup. um but I'm saying it's that subtle message
Right.
that kids get, that people who are like sadly there's a hope that the police will find our daughters if they go missing, but the somewhere woven in that expectation uh, is the expectation that they won't be taken all that seriously.
Right.
That I will first have to prove that um, she wasn't prostituting or just going.
Right.
And I'm not trying to blanket all law enforcement to say that's how they would think or whatever. I guess I'm just talking about the newsworthiness of it, to the degree that there is a nationwide be on the lookout for my daughter.
Right.
There are a
Right.
bunch of women who don't feel that. And to be fair, um, there may be a bunch of white women who have had that same experience when their daughters have gone missing,
Mm-hmm.
particularly if they are not white women of any sort of status in society, so status in that way,
Mm-hmm.
um, or whatever. Um, but I just certain studies about how people look at images of white girls and black girls and how they decide which ones are positive, negative,
Yeah.
all of that. These are scientific studies
Yeah.
that have a place in how these things play out in the media. They get excused by saying, well, this sells more papers. But part of the reason it does is because we're still training ourselves and training each other to look at these differences as deficient. And that
Yes. People who
is a
are
big problem.
interested. Oh, sorry. Say that last thing again.
No, I just said that is a big problem.
And that is a problem. People who are interested in understanding that problem more should go onto YouTube and search for the research that Kenneth and Mamie Clark did at Columbia University. If I'm not mistaken, Mamie Clark was the first Black woman to earn a PhD in the Columbia Graduate School of Education. In any case, as a couple, they conducted the first studies that of the nature you're describing, where children are
Mm-hmm.
shown children of different ethnicities. In the original research that Kenneth and Mamie Clark did, they were asking first a group of Black children shown a white doll and a black doll in sequence, or in this case together, point to the good doll, and they point to the white doll, point to the bad doll, point to the pretty doll. Now these are dolls that in their dress and their hair and what they're, at least what the doll makers were striving to convey as their gender, were identical except for their skin tone. And
Mm-hmm.
and this is now, been replicated 50, 60 years later now with intermediate skin tones, and asking Black kids and white kids and Latinx kids and other BIPOC kids, mixed race kids. And you often find what Kenneth and Mamie Clark did, which is that for a multitude of reasons, but this is, what's scary, because it doesn't necessarily have to be as explicit as we imagine. Children of all different ethnicities will label lighter colored skinned dolls as the good ones or the pretty ones, despite no differences except the skin color. And of course there are exceptions, and of course we can think about some of the ways in which you and I've talked about this, exposure to lots of different people and experiences and points of view and cultural traditions and body shapes and sizes and colors begins to help a person create a data set in their own head that decouples differences in status with skin color,
Right.
or other indicators of race. And that is what we need to do. It happens naturally for some people and not with others. And what we're talking about today, what things that we absorb during the day without thinking about it a lot. What's a headline? What's a product? How is it portrayed? Kenneth and Mamie Clark were the ones who showed that there are enduring influences. It's just,
and it's what we practice once, like looking at a study like that will make you aware of the fact that thinking is out there and probably in here. But then we get to, and you and I have had this discussion before too. So now we get to the now what,
right.
what are you going to do about it once you realize it? And I think part of the thing with dealing with all of the things regarding race, period, is about changing that dynamic from thinking differences mean deficiency.
Yes.
As long as we practice seeing each other, like you were talking about earlier, with equal high status, regardless of what the differences are, then I think we'll go a long way in, like minimizing the effects of these things, the occurrences, the number of occurrences. There will be, I think, an increased demand in making sure that It's not as easy to take and get away with moving, some of our daughters through, this trafficking and
Yeah.
killing them and that kind of thing without anybody but us caring about them. That
Yeah.
whole thing would change. Um, this is a great movie years ago. I say years ago like it was the
Years
the
ago.
50s, but it was like 90 in the 90s.
Whew.
A Time to Kill.
Yes.
Sam Jackson and Matthew McConaughey,
Yeah.
and for those people who may have not seen the movie, spoiler alert, it's only been out 30 years, so maybe
Well,
At any rate,
we'll show some stills and a clip here in a minute.
but it's a movie where Sam Jackson is a father whose daughter was essentially kidnapped, brutalized by these redneck white men in Mississippi, I believe. At any rate, and when he figured they were going to get away with nearly killing his daughter, but they did horrible stuff to her and then dumped her over a bridge. He came in and killed them
He comes into the
and
courtroom, right?
into the courthouse, yeah, and
Yeah.
kills them. And so he's on trial uh, for their murders. And Matthew McConaughey is charged with defending him. And so there's a really great speech that kind of sums up everything we've talked about
Yeah.
through all these episodes, in my opinion, where Sam Jackson is essentially saying that he's clarifying things for Matthew McConaughey, who was sort of defeated, and saying that, well, there's no more points of law that I can argue. There's no, I don't know what to do to essentially, get you acquitted. And he's telling him, listen, man, you think we're friends, but we're not friends. I know you, you come and eat at the soul food restaurant or whatever, but we're not, friends,
Yeah.
and our kids will probably never play together or whatever. He's saying, I understand that. He says the words that he's America's a war, he says, and you on the other side. You don't mean to be, you want to be a nice guy and everything, but you see me as a black man before you see me as a man.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. And so he tells him that you have to think about what it would take for you, if you were on the jury, to set me free, because you're them. You think like them. When called on it, you don't. But for real, in what you've been trained to, so you can't not think like that. So he's saying, you my secret weapon. I love it when he says it.
Yeah.
So that's why I picked you. You my secret weapon. That's why I picked you. So and so Matthew McConaughey goes on to get him acquitted because and this is what I mean about the missing white girl syndrome thing. He does a closing argument, Matthew McConaughey does, where he tells the jury to close their eyes. And he details all of the brutality, step by step, that happened to this black girl, how she was bound, how she was sexually assaulted, how she was beaten, the bones that were broken. I mean, the whole gruesome tale. And then how she was thrown over a bridge and all this. And he's like, can you see her there lying there, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of it, he says, imagine she was white. And everybody in the jury is like, opens their eyes like, just a shock, like a lightning bolt to him. Because until that point, because of the context of the case, they had been seeing her as black.
Right.
And so even though it was brutal and all of that, um, they were less moved until he said, now imagine she was white.
Yeah.
And then imagining she was white got Sam Jackson's character acquitted.
Yeah.
Just the ability to close that gap between what I would feel as a father and what you, Chris, would feel as a father. Being able to close that gap by removing the fact that I am a black father and you are a
Right.
white father. We're fathers, and you know,
Right.
I feel like that would cut a lot of this out. And that's what I mean sometimes when we're talking and I say, you know, I don't understand. I was talking when we were talking about the police brutality thing, and we were talking. It was a guy I was talking with, and we were talking about the killing of unarmed black men in America, and he made a comment to me about white men getting killed by police, and I said, well, why are we not up in arms about that? Because I didn't know that that many of them like that were getting killed, and if that's the case, I'm mad about that. Like, why are we not mad
Right.
just that American citizens are being unjustly killed in the streets by police? Like, why do we have to make it black men for you to care or not care? You should just care that there are people being that this is happening to, and that should outrage you enough to where whatever your political leaning is, you should say that part of it has to stop. And it doesn't mean I don't back police. It doesn't mean I don't. It means I want what I would want for me and my kid, for you and your kid.
Yeah.
I don't understand why that. And it's the same way with the missing girls. I would want the missing anybody, but we're talking about the ladies. I would want the police to be just as zealous for my daughter as your daughter and your daughter as my
Yeah.
daughter. I would want the media coverage to be just as intense. I would want to stop people from doing this to women, not just black women, not just white women. But when you do the other thing that we're talking about, you send that message that brutalizing the girl in the time to kill is terrible, but not quite as terrible because she's black. And it's not until you say, now imagine she's white, that that changes for you and it gets,
Right.
you know, a whole lot brighter.
Yeah. This moment when he says, now imagine she's white, and the jury is just shocked and, you know, like opening their eyes, is proof positive that they could, that they were thinking very differently about brutalizing a young black girl than they would think about brutalizing a young white girl. And at one point, when Samuel L. Jackson is trying to describe to Matthew McConaughey, who, you know, having just rewatched that scene, Matthew McConaughey's listening, not yet understanding, or maybe not understanding completely, but more at the end. But that's what Samuel L. Jackson is trying to describe to him, that he says, you know, there's a white judge and a white jury. I don't have a chance. And then, as you pointed out, he says, you know, you're my secret weapon. But the gamble that Sam Jackson's character is taking is that Matthew McConaughey is going to understand this and not be so angry to, you know, at Sam Jackson, like saying, we're on different sides of this. We just, because you see me as a black man, not as a man. And maybe that could change for you. It's not going to change for the jury. And then it gets, you know, Matthew McConaughey's wheels turning. You know, I have to tell
you. That's a good point, though, because I don't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry, but that's a good point, because that's kind of one of the other problems I think we have these days, too, is to even have this kind of discussion. There's that resistance because everybody gets angry and defensive,
right?
Which Matthew McConaughey's character could have gotten.
Yeah, don't
Instead,
tell me how to do my job. Look, I'm the lawyer here, so
right, and don't call me, you know, like racist or align me with those people. Instead, he says, "Well, wait a minute, what would I have to hear if I was them, what
Right.
and then as he gets that understanding, he's able to give that understanding later in that closing argument.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that we also have to do. And I say we because Black people have to do it, on our side, as well. Um, is everybody just has to start saying, what would it take, to
Right.
convince
Right. Which is,
you to
that's
set me
such a
free?
great question, right? It's
Yeah.
such a beautifully written monologue. I mean, it's a dialogue for a while, but
Mhm.
what Samuel L. Jackson says at the end, I need you to think about what it would take, what you would need to hear
Mhm.
to see me, for the jury to see me as if you were sitting on that jury,
What
what
would
would
it
you
take
need to
for you to
hear?
set me free? That's what he
Yeah.
said. Yeah, yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
What would you
Yeah.
need to hear for you to set me free? It reminds me, um, and I know we're coming up on time, but when I was, I have to think 7 or 8, I'm thinking of the house
So a
we were
long,
in
so a long time ago.
back when the world was black and white, long before A Time to Kill was produced, before the 90s.
Mm,
Um,
right.
but I know I was 7 because I know where the TV was, and the TV was black and white,
Mhm.
in our basement, and I was allowed to watch cartoons for an hour and a half on Saturday morning, which I loved. Again, back in the day, 4 channels: ABC, NBC, PBS,
Right.
and
Right.
ABC,
TV went
whatever.
off at night. Yeah.
Right. Um, so highly pixelated that I think any kids today watching it would not recognize it as a cartoon. But
Right.
there was a PSA, a public service announcement, that you may have seen or remember. It's a vastly simplified version of this scene that we're talking about from A Time to Kill, but a grandfather and a boy who is about my age, 7, both white, are out in a rowboat on a pond fishing alone, 2 of
Hmm.
them.
Hmm.
And the camera kind of zooms in, and the boy says, "Grandpa, David says I'm prejudiced, not racist, but um." And the grandfather says, "Who's David?" And the boy says, "My black friend." And the grandfather says, "You are prejudiced."
Mm.
And I must have seen that 50 times every Saturday until, and you have to imagine, my parents are upstairs asleep. My brother's sitting there
Hmm.
watching, 2 years younger, waiting for the cartoons. I don't know what crossed his mind. I won't speak for him, but basically, I was just confused for a year until, after seeing it so many times, I thought, you know, now I understand. Um, by saying David's my black friend rather than David's my friend, you're doing what Sam Jackson's character is trying to explain. You're seeing
Hmm.
me as a member of this out group, not as a fellow human being.
Hmm.
And you know, it's just, and I think the PSA continued. I still, despite the fact that it offered an explanation, I was not getting it until I'd seen it enough times to wrap my head around it. Because I was thinking, well, black is a descriptor. Like, I don't know, David's
Hmm.
my friend who plays basketball, or David's my friend who is a film writer. But uh, that,
But
I think the boy
if the
says,
friend was white, you wouldn't say,
he's my
you
white friend.
being white wouldn't say my white friend, blah, blah, blah. You wouldn't
Right.
say that. You would just say my friend.
Which I think is what the grandfather in that PSA, I'll try to find it, goes back and says, or the boy says, "How come?" And the grandfather says, "Well, if he were," he doesn't make the comparison to white, but he says,
Hmm.
"Well, if he's your friend, you would just say he's my friend, not my black friend. It's maybe more eloquent than that, but they should still show that. Anyway,
now more than ever.
Yeah, right.
But no, I mean, I wish I had seen that. I don't remember that. I would like to see that, but it's that's exactly it. You see when you see people as different and see them as their
Yeah.
difference first, then it's like, this is and I want to be clear. I think it's important to understand that there are differences. I'm never trying to say that you should not see color.
Right.
I think that there's color for a reason. I just don't think that reason is to automatically say that this person is less than some kind of way or less worthy of consideration because of said color.
Right.
That
Right.
this person in a dangerous kidnapped situation is less worthy of being found and looked for and all the wagons circled because of the difference in the skin color. That's what I mean by, the thing about the differences. But I do think it's important to see them and to learn from them and know. I think it increases our cultural IQs.
Oh
That's a
yeah.
term that gets thrown around a lot, but I think it increases all of that and makes you, grow more as a person. But you do have to start with and finish with the fact that whatever I'm bringing to the table from wherever I come from is beneficial to whatever this relationship is that you and I have or potentially have. And I think that's the part that gets missing is that whatever my difference is and the race is more immediately seen, it we start that from a negative just because we think that because you're this race somehow and you're
Right.
different somehow you're deficient or like I said less worthy of that, and
Yeah.
that's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
I was able to quickly find just the beginning of your comment there, the PSA. I don't know if you want to give me screen sharing power here, but I can play it. It'll be interesting to see whether it whether it's exactly as I remember it, but and it's from the 1970s. It says, so I have no idea whether.
Let's see here. There you go.
And it has
Making
like,
you the
what
host.
is my memory for this? Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen and we'll play this and see what we think before we wrap up. Let's see, share sound, optimize for video.
Grandpa, yesterday Jimmy said I was prejudiced.
Do you know what prejudice is?
No.
Well, prejudice is when you react to someone because of their religion or their color.
But I don't do that.
Who is Jimmy?
Jimmy's only my Jewish friend.
Then you are prejudiced because you think of Jimmy as your Jewish friend and not your friend.
So that version says you think of Jimmy as your Jewish friend and not your friend. I know the one I saw was also, there were probably other versions of this that, and apologies for the bad video. We may cut it out and splice in a better version, but
right.
The point is, props to this grandfather who is taking the time to explain that difference.
Absolutely. And hopefully we can start doing that more with our young people to where as they get older, I'm encouraged by young people today. I think they're doing some of this anyway. But crossing some of these divides, better.
Yeah.
And so that's all we can hope, is that the next generation does better. But it's going to take us having some conversations like, them in that boat, and conversations like you and I are having here. So
yeah. Well, let's have
I
more.
hope, let's do that. I hope they find, like I said, bring Miss Petito's murder to justice, and that they find all missing ladies, and
Yes.
bring any abductors of theirs to justice. Let's just stop being cruel to each other, and
Amen.
just be better people, man. Be better people. I'm looking forward to the next discussion. And we'll be posting these every Wednesday on where you get your podcast, and on I'm Black, You're White, Now What, the Facebook page. And so with that, Doc, what you got to say?
Always a pleasure. And we hope that people will comment and like the podcast and the posts, and let us know about topics that you would like to discuss, or guests that you have to suggest. We're open to all these different possibilities, because I think I've had enough conversations with David to know, you and I agree that it's only through conversation and friendship and relationships and real honest conversations that we can reach a greater understanding and achieve, I hope, your goal, our shared goal of seeing everyone, treating everyone with equal status.
Absolutely. All right, well, thank you very much, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
See you soon.
Thank you for listening to I'm Black, You're White, Now What?
You can find more episodes on the podcast channel Teaching What It Takes, available on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Spotify.
To learn more about the work I do, visit www.preparingthepath.com.
And to learn more about the work I do, visit drchristhurber.com.